Hello and welcome to a short talk on how to reflect. It's a very important skill in modern academia and is often seen as a secondary skill, a little bit done at the end of the module, a little bit done at the end of the course, one that maybe brings in a bit of employability but isn't seen itself as a key academic skill. I think that is wrong, and I'm explaining why I think it is wrong today. And this is not a new idea. This goes back all the way to ancient China, and we can look at it first from this. Confucius says, by three methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is the noblest. Second, by imitation, which is the easiest, that is copying. Any monkey can do that. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. So what we're trying to do is say, if you can learn from what you've done and what you've learned from your mistakes, etc., then it is better. So therefore we're trying to say, let's look at how we might reflect and how we might actually integrate academic thinking directly into that reflection rather than doing it separately. I thought I might start by letting you see a little bit of myself in my office. As you can see, I have an interest in various science fiction and weird weapons. My bat'leth, my archery and longbow, which of course is a proper weapon. The bat'leth is blunt. I have my wizard staff, or my longbow. I'm sure I would say that an interest in ancient weaponry. We have here Leonardo da Vinci's catapult. We have a much more powerful device for flinging of great rocks filled with coinage. We have usual maps for games like diplomacy, for terraforming Mars, for war on terror. We have various robots and drones, a pack of bourbon whiskey, a good collection of Highland Park Rebus special. Tells you something about me, just to give you some feeling about this. And this is for bird spotting. So out in the garden, obviously we're having the SBB thing going on at the moment. So just let's give you a sort of introduction to myself. My name is Jonathan Fanning. I'm a senior lecturer in international strategy at the University of York, at the time of writing this at least. And let's actually begin. I'm going to turn my camera off now. I'm just going to concentrate on the PowerPoint. So, look at Confucius, how to reflect. Let's move it forward and look at what comes up next. What is reflective writing? It's a big question, of course. It's very important. Reflective writing involves an explanation of your experience in class, in teams, and in your general experiences beyond that. Reflective writing can be useful anywhere. We'll see later on that there are groups once outside the classroom who use reflective writing for very important purposes and learning. It may feel particularly difficult in some ways and more challenging than other forms of academic writing, partly because it doesn't feel particularly academic. If it's done at its most basic in a descriptive form, it comes across as a little bit what I did in my holidays and how I felt. It's often referred to keeping a reflective diary because it's not a million miles away from the experience of keeping a diary. So what you're looking at is recording stuff not only about your academic successes and errors, but anxieties and interactions. How did you learn of others? What people helped you in the practical nature of your tasks and involving yourself in other things. But the most important thing as well is it's also part of what I consider to be the most important academic skill, and that is the synthesis of theories and actions and practice. So in academic writing, you would normally describe a model and explain what maybe its strengths and weaknesses and maybe look for a case. Well, reflective writing is getting inside that model and implementing that model in action and seeing how it works and reflecting on it and deciding how you might change that model. So therefore it's very important in writing reflective writing academically that in fact it's the truest form of academia. You shouldn't just copy and paste the model. You say, oh, this is a nice picture of Porter's Five Forces I got from a textbook, and I'll put a reference in the bottom of it so people don't think I'm stealing it, and then we'll do that. It's actually integrating that model into practice and showing how you use Five Forces. And there's a way of showing that in your writing, which actually is very simple, but I'm always surprised when people do it so little, and instead would rather do cut and paste. And let's be honest, cutting and pasting Porter's model doesn't tell me you understand it, it tells me you know how to cut and paste. So therefore, it's really important that you actually use this method if you're going to be using models and theories, because these will show you actually understand them. It's the difference between a pass, a merit, a distinction, if you want to be as crass as that, is simply look at it from the point of view of grading. And the other thing to remember about reflection is a cycle. A number of people talk about Gibbs reflective cycle and go through it once, so it becomes a Gibbs reflective list, and a list is not particularly reflective, is a little bit depression at times. So, having looked at what it is, how do we do it? A few things to do, okay? Set the scene. This understanding, start off by saying, what did you understand at the beginning of this? When you first started out, what was your understanding of strategy? How do you understand it? What did you do that? Back that up with one or two academic references to show perhaps where you've developed your ideas from, or where you think that some of these ideas might have come from, or some idea of what strategy is. Then look at the idea of what you've actually done over the course of the module, and pick out, not everything, pick out 3 or 4 examples of what you did. Think about what each of them meant to you, describe them, how did they work out, how could it be improved, was it the model accurate and helpful, and then conclusion at the end of it is, what would you do differently? If you're making strategic choices, what would you do differently to what you did? Not just if you're saying exactly the same thing again, but have your ideas of how you might respond to a strategic problem changed at all. There's no need to put academic references in that particular section there. Again, don't waste loads of words explaining your diagram. Use a diagram. As I said, annotate them with what you actually did. Okay, don't just put 5 forces with what each of the 5 forces is. Put an example from your experience of what each of the 5 forces was. Not an example from the book, an example from your strategic experience that you're writing up. Okay, as you're going through, you will have been making notes, making coursework, presuming things for your actual strategic decisions, and you can actually use those within your final report, within your final presentation. So for the group name, whichever it was, presented your data presentation. Then you can actually reference them. It becomes part of your work, part of your ongoing interest, part of your ongoing commitment and learning. So you can use them as part of your group, etc. How do we integrate academic evidence into reflective writing then? Think about what happened and try and think about how a particular theory might have related to it. This can either be deductive, at its simplest it might be saying, we're going to do a pestle now on the environment that we'll be looking at as part of our experiences, and let's see what that pestle tells us. At the end of it, was that pestle useful, or was it just a piece of paper with a load of things written down that we never referred to it? That sort of thing. It could be inductive. You could be halfway through trying to work in your teams and go, oh, this is Tuckman's work. This is where we're forming. This is where we're storming. Oh, this is Tuckman's wrong here. We're supposed to be progressing, and now in fact we're going backwards and we're squabbling again like we did on the first week. Maybe it's a criticism of the theory, and it's inductive because you actually only start to think about the theory after the event takes place. That's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly reasonable. That's the way it actually does work in the real world. So that's what you're trying to think. Is your organisation consistent with the theory? Have the theories help you to interpret experience? Now remember, all models are wrong, some models are useful. Maybe Tuckman's theory, with its linear teamwork progression, is useful because you realise how wrong it is in certain areas, but although the sections happen, they don't happen in the order that Tuckman says they happen. They don't happen in the simplistic way they happen. Maybe Belbin's helpful because Belbin actually shows you how you need different members of a team with different skills and different background. But actually you don't need the 8, 9, 10 members depending on which version of Belbin you're looking at. So that's how you sort of look at it. You're looking at things that are consistent with the theory, things that are inconsistent. Theory might be wrong, but is it useful? Does it help you think? Put them together. Put them together, practice and modify the models. Okay, that is the whole point of what you're doing then. You're annotating the models. Don't just put what the model says in the textbook, put what your experience is related to the model, and that may cause you to make changes to the model. That's all well and good. Make sure you're still referencing the original model and pointing out the changes that you have made. So, be selective. Don't try and write up everything that happens during this strategic experience. Identifying what actually matters. Okay, reflect deep on a few significant aspects, but points that you actually learn from. Don't be afraid to discuss it with others. Be wary of the fact you also need to submit some of this all your own work, but actually you are parts of teams, you are parts of groups, you are part of experience, both formal and informal ones. Make sure you work together on that part of it. Deepen your insight, improve your ability to express your ideas, and help to explore a range of perspectives. Okay? So get other people's point of view, use the diverse learning that's in your group, use the ideas you might be able to pick up from elsewhere. Try as far as possible to make it something which you can all benefit, contribute to your group, learn from your group, be part of this diverse ideas and teamwork abilities that are coming forward. That's what makes it a really deep, rich learning experience. Remember to go beyond the stuff that is straightforward theories, that is straightforward strategic theories. We'll talk a lot about the fact that you need to be able to have leaders and followers, and if you haven't got followers, you are not a leader, and you don't have to lead all the time, but the reality is you need to. There'll be times when you do need to. But the reality in the end is if you're to achieve anything in strategy, you have to persuade people to undertake your plans. Now you might, if you're the president or the general, maybe you can force people to undertake your plans, but even Sun Tzu talked about the need to be benevolent, the need to be understanding. And this greatest general of all time, he was not one who believed in discipline, but he didn't believe that actually you should be able to force them. You needed to bring the soldiers on board. He talks about the soldiers being, if the soldiers are not on board, and he used the phrase submissive, at first and you start giving them orders, you will actually lose them. What you need to do is gain them on board. You need to make them submissive. And he uses that phrase. I think that's a mistranslation or a transmission that's unfortunate connotations in English, but really just saying actually you need to get the soldiers on board, you need to get the people on board, you need to get the king on board as well to a certain extent. You can't just listen to whatever he says. There are times when you may have to question the king. He makes all these points, so you need to actually also think about that as you do it. So think about group work, think about how you work as a team, think about how you manage to persuade people, think how you learn from other people, maybe change your ideas as you went forward. You cannot win the argument with your own team. You will not be a success in strategy. No matter how you have the greatest ideas in the world, but if you cannot get people to implement them, then you won't be a success. Remember, the art of war is great strategy because it is poetry, not as well as or even despite it being poetry. Because it is poetry, that is one of the keys to why this book has stood the test of time, and why we are now trying to liberate it from a stifling neoliberal colonialisation of it. I use that term, I think we are decolonising this piece of great strategic literature. As was started, the decolonisation of it was started by Gia from the battlefields of Vietnam. So do not just describe, synthesise. What references we're going to use? We're going to use academic references, obviously, stuff like textbooks, scholarly books, journal articles, probably the most important of the academic references, and conference proceedings, probably the second most important, where we've actually discussed these ideas and maybe talk about implementation. Those conference proceedings can be academic conferences, or they can be practice conferences, which we'll see some groups that do use practice conferencing, but even they must be properly written up, properly referenced, properly considered. Might be other online university research publications, so have a look, but obviously anything online you have to be really careful about the source you could get it from. Non-academic references, as many of these you want, you'll find them useful in pestles, used in SWOTs, might be part of your group work, might be from your lecture notes. But newspapers, the BBC is very good at this, the Financial Times is very good at this, China Daily is very good at this, the various other Times of India, if you're looking at different parts of the world, these are all really important pieces of work. And other websites, but again, be very cautious about non-academic websites, make sure that the one you're looking at is something that we can actually say is reasonable in what it does and what it says. So why reflect? Because we're trying to strengthen your understanding, we're trying to get really deep, knowledgeable appreciation of the material, trying to embed it into your memory by just making you go over it again and again and actually relate it to things that have actually happened. On a technical level, many professional institutions require it. I'm a member of the HEA and the IET. Both of them are institutions that require me to reflect on my professional development in order to achieve the higher levels. The same also with my member of the Association of Management and Business Executives. I need to reflect in order to get to the higher levels of that. I just have to do an annual reflection in order to maintain my post-nominal in those areas. So it's very important in your professional development for ability to reflect, but it's also important for your learning from your understanding. So, for instance, the Institute of Engineers use it, the Higher Education Academy uses it, the Chartered Management Institute uses it, others use it. Very common among nursing, very common among doctors, very common among lawyers, very common among the new accountancy institutes. Really, you do need to make sure that you understand this to a great depth. So it's very important to you going forward reflection. It's an important skill. It's a key academic skill. It's a key life skill as well. Just key, unusually for academia, you will use the first person reflective writing. It is based on your own experience. However, any work about this strategy is going to contain both reflective writing and academic writing. It's therefore going to be mix and match. So you might well find yourself writing sometimes the first one, I felt that, and sometimes the third person, Smith 2009 proposes that. You need them to mix and match them. I strongly urge you not to separate them out completely, because if you do, you will write a very poor essay. The whole point of the standard of learning and style of learning is that strategy is key to doing it together as a combined thing. So produce a balance, weave them together, have sections that say I thought, I felt, and mix them in relevant academic theories. Much more effective than making them separate, much more effective. So do deal with it in this method of putting them forward in a way that you think combines the two very well. So to demonstrate synthesis and reflection, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you how to use Gibbs' reflective cycle in a manner that shows it being synthesized and the reflection being done. It is slightly modified, as is the correct way of using any of the things, but it's very much based on the original of Gibbs, and it's the way I've reflected on it, made slight changes to it. And it involves synthesis. It is synthesized with the experience of team forming through game playing. So I hope it's very relevant to some of the things that you're doing. It weaves together, I believe, description, reflection, theory, and synthesis, and it brings them together into a combined whole. And I think it's not only a different way of writing, I believe it's a different way of thinking that will help you develop your ideas. So let's look at it now. We're looking at Gibbs' reflective cycle. Okay. Gibbs' reflective cycle, of course, goes as a process, and we started describing your situation. Once you describe your situation, you relate how you feel about your situation to it. Once you've done that situation of feelings, you evaluate it. How did your feelings affect the situation? How do you develop from that? Because you're moving towards an analysis of the situation, a deep understanding of the situation, and a conclusion about how you might then go on to change your actions and what actions you may take. And that should then go back. There should be a new development, a new description based on the changes you've made. That is a reflective cycle, but it is once around the reflective cycle. I see an endless number of students who go once around the cycle, tick the box that says I have done Gibbs and move on. They haven't done Gibbs. They've done Gibbs' reflective list, which isn't an academic model at all. It's their version of an academic model, and it's not a particularly effective one. It's a false synthesis. What I'd also say is that they actually, other people, they just put this up in the screen, say, look, I've shown I understand Gibbs. No, you've shown you can copy Gibbs from the slide, you can copy Gibbs from the book. What I'd actually like to see in your writings isn't this. I'd like to see a situation in which you actually put what your actions were. When you say this is Gibbs' reflective cycle, you would actually put in what you did. So we met as a group of played Bucket of Doom. That's your description. So I know that you understand that part of the cycle. You then said I felt a little silly because it was a bit of a silly game. You put that down there because that shows you understand the feelings that part of Gibbs' reflective cycle, much better than just copying and pasting. What is this idiot doing, you thought, looking at the lecturer? Why isn't he teaching us something? Why aren't we having a lecture on how to do a SWOT? Why are we playing Bucket of Doom? That's a fair comment, a fair evaluation of the situation. Oh, Tuckman. I noticed Tuckman was on the VLE. It's group formation theory. We're supposed to be forming. You don't really believe me. You are forming at the moment. You kind of got an understanding of what the idiot at the front of the classroom, in this case in front of the screen, is doing. I guess we also need to use the tools. That's the way we're being sent back and forth to get an understanding of how to use the collaborate rooms, how to use the discussion boards. I think maybe that's what we're aiming at here. So let's get a plan together to help us communicate. Rob's going to need to talk a lot over the next 8 weeks. It's not something in which we just turn up to 8 lectures, turn up to 8 seminars and write an essay. We're actually going to have to do something. Probably at this point you're not feeling particularly happy about it and wondering if it's time you could be able to swap to another module, etc. So that gives it through. So that takes you round. But that is not Gibbs' reflective cycle, that's Gibbs' reflective list. For Gibbs' reflective cycle, I would then expect you to go on and do something different. So what we'd say is that is you actually go round, you have a second go round. Oh, we met up and collaborate. Part of the group, a description, we met up and collaborate. Why won't X talk? That's typical of a Martian. Typical Martian, they turn off the course, they're not really getting involved, they're staying quiet in the corner. Why won't they text talk? Oh yeah, the internet's pretty slow all that way from Mars, isn't it? They've not been able to get here. So they're doing that. So they're live. They can't really take fast. The 20-minute time lag on their cameras, so it's not helping very much. But actually, somebody from Mars, groupthink, saw that on the VLE. They might have ideas that we just wouldn't have here on Earth. I think we should maybe think how we might want to involve this Martian. How might we get them involved? And they think, aha! Let's use the asynchronous tools as well as the synchronous. Let's allow thinking time so that the speed of light can carry our messages back and forth to Mars. So you've gone around twice, so that's more like a cycle. But it's still not quite right. I'd like to see a good one. Round we go again for a third time. So, last time you talked in collaborate, but now we're talking synchronously and synchronously. Now everyone's talking, that's great. So the X wouldn't talk. Now we're getting good ideas through from Mars. They talk all the time. There's lots of information coming through from Mars. It's getting through. Lots of emails, etc. Ooh, that was a particularly good idea came through from Mars, but hang a sec, we're evaluating this here. That's not going to work on Earth. Gravity's different. We're further from the sun. We don't actually. It's a bit too much warmth for that, but there's a base of a good idea here. And how might we modify that? Do that. Now this relates. De Vita suggesting multiple groups work best eventually together. Are we doing Tuchman storming at the moment? These are questions that are worth asking if we're reflecting on it, trying to build on it. Is there something in these two theories that might be helpful to us? And how might we adapt things? Because we need these Martian ideas and they are very good, but how might we make them work here on Earth? So, by synthesizing the theory of De Vita, the theory of Tuchman, maybe the theory of Belbin, maybe the theory of Gibbs, maybe putting them together, by synthesizing the theory of the experience of play, it enabled us to come up with ideas that helped us practice in action and made a change. And we went around 3 times, so we demonstrated proper cycle. I don't need to see a model of you saying this is Gibbs, because I can see that you understand Gibbs because you've utilised Gibbs. And that's the true method of using models in reflective academic practice. So some final tips. Don't just describe, unless you're happy with 50%. Explore and explain what happened. Be honest. The whole point of reflection is to admit you made mistakes. Don't try and pretend everything went perfectly. Show you understood what went wrong and how you learned from it and what would you do different next time to try and stop it going wrong. Don't report everything. Hopefully you've kept a diary every week, but pick out bits of the diary that seem most likely to you, most important, most evident, and put them in. Look forward thinking. Don't just think what happened in the past. The whole point of this is to learn what's going to develop in the future. So think how it will have an impact on the future ideas or activities. So, to summarise, start from the beginning. Start with what your thought strategy was before this experience happened to you, hopefully happened with you. Don't try and talk about absolutely everything, it'll be too short. Pick 3 or 4 major incidents, including the way you learn to work and talk and operate together as a team. Use both theory and practice, use references, but implement them. Do not waste words. Use a lot of diagrams, but do not just reproduce diagrams from textbooks. I don't need to know that you can copy and paste. I know you need to be able to understand. End with not where you are, but where you are going. Do not just say, this is the end of the module. Allow a couple of 100 words to say, and now this is what I will do next. This is a case of writing up a learning journey and documenting it. So please take it very, very seriously. In the end, I honestly believe this will help you develop your theory, your practice, and develop you as a strategist, whether that be strategicus Descartes, anticlastus Descartes, but hopefully it'll be a synthesis of both. Thank you for listening.